getting started does not need to mean removing your financial security blanket. It can be just launching a very simple website to test your concept. It can mean putting together a database of the kind of people you think are going to want your product and then testing the most basic idea. I've worked in startups for many years and I find that my mind glazes over when I hear terms like MVP, minimum viable product, etc. But really, what it is just get a really, really simple version of what you want and get people to start using it. And if it sucks, then that's great because you're learning things.
Welcome to the Get Rich Slow Club. I'm Anna, and I'm here today with Wenee and Thomas, who are authors of the book, Riding the Unicorn. Now, an amazing title for a book. And if you're wondering, what is this book about? It is about startups in both New Zealand and in Australia. And this is something that I feel excited and passionate about because I've worked in startups multiple times. And also there's, a little bit in me who loves the idea of starting a business. And I know a lot of people who listen to the podcast are either side hustling, starting their own business, or potentially are working at a startup. So welcome to the show. Before we get started, I'd love to hear, what is your money win or loss of the week?
Wenee, do you want to take it for us?
Oh, well, we have a big money win. So we're recently up in sunny Cairns for the Tropical Innovation Festival. We were invited to give a speech about this book. And when we went to pay for the hotel bill, they said, oh, that's all good. It's done for you. And
amazing.
The conference did it. I was like, that's about $1,000. Thank you very much. Big money win.
And everything up until that point had suggested that we would need to pay for it. So we'd budgeted for it and everything. So it was like we had won several $100s.
Yep, we'll take it.
Oh, amazing. That's fantastic. And especially since you're promoting the book and you've got it all for free.
Yeah.
So let's dive into the book. A lot of people are starting out with trying to do a business or a side hustle. Maybe eventually it'll turn out to be a big startup. How do you see people in Australia thinking about businesses and startups?
I think one of the big challenges that people in Australia have is that so much of our money goes into property investments. And that's not even really their fault. Our economy is geared that way. But at the same time, there's this huge appetite for people to give things a go, start their own businesses. You have startups from Airtasker to Canva, Atlassian, and some of these are covered in our book, coming from here and then scaling. But what we really wanted to explore is, why do they encounter such issues and how do they grow and how they overcome that even to go overseas?
I think something else that was really important to us was framing the idea of launching a business, whether it's a side hustle, a small business, or a startup, in terms that would be relevant to Australia and New Zealand. Because there's a lot of great business guides out there, but we found that a lot of those that come from, say, the US, they might have great insights, but they often feel like war biographies. They're very oorah, as if they're written by Marines or something.
Everything from Shoe Dog, to an Elon Musk biography.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we just didn't really feel that resonated with us as Australians. Here in Australia and in New Zealand, there's much more of a self-deprecating culture. And Wenee and I, we've both been fortunate enough to meet a lot of different founders who have become very successful in Australia. And a common denominator we found was that they didn't have this predator or prey mentality. It kind of had this survival of the friendliest mentality. I guess sometimes you need to make tough decisions, but you also need to be willing to laugh at your failures, and you need to depend on the community that has grown around you. And that's something that we really wanted to showcase in Riding the Unicorn.
That's interesting that you say that, because one of the things I noticed as well is just how culturally North America and Australia and New Zealand are different. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that if you're starting a business somewhere in Australia where so many people think about investments, property, a lot of people don't think about investing in a business or how a business can grow your wealth or how you can grow your own wealth by starting your own business, because that culture is a little bit more quiet here in Australia. So you've talked to a lot of people. What are some of the big things that you see is a commonality between the CEOs that kind of start these businesses?
I think there's one quality that all of the CEOs and founders we interviewed showcased, and that was their approach to problem solving.
Absolutely. It's so interesting. In Australia, because you are so deprived of resources, certainly from an investment perspective. But we have high education, we have a good, give it a go culture. What we noticed from all the CEOs we interviewed, all these founders, is that they're all problem solvers in chief. That is, whatever problem they were encountering today was the website down. They're going to run out that problem. They're going to understand everything about web development and make that website work. Are they going to need to fundraise today? That's something that they're going to need to learn from scratch, learn how to pitch, speak to VC funds and work their way through that. And that's something that we saw consistently. I think Alexis Solopoulos, who was the CEO of MadPause, now he's the CEO of EverAI, which I believe had a $22 million revenue last year.
Even higher, yeah.
Even higher. And I think he's such a good example of this. He came out as a graduate out of University of Sydney, basically became a founder from day one. And that's very green, very, very new. And one of the things that he would learn how to do was pitch really effectively. But even through that process, he had great humility. He would pitch to the team. He'd pitch every moment he got. He didn't assume that he had it down. He'd fly to everywhere he needed to go to make sure that the funds got raised. And I think that was something else that was just such an interesting aspect of speaking to founders here. There was less of that posturing, less of that, we're doing great, everything's fantastic, and what can we learn out of this?
And I think because they had this problem solver in chief mentality, none of them ever had this tacit assumption that they'd reach the other side. That once they had raised investment or once they'd launched their first product, their problems would disappear and they could settle into business as usual. No, they knew that their job was always going to be solving new problems. And the problems would change as the business grew, but they'd never disappear. So we coined this term, having spoken to all of them, the pyramid of priorities. This idea that you have three different kinds of problems. And they are, what's a problem that's going to sink our business today? What might sink it 6 months from now, and what might sink it eventually? So, for example, you often talk about financial products on this podcast. If you're a fintech and you have launched a financial product that doesn't align with regulatory requirements, that could sink your business today. If ASIC catches wind of what you're doing, you're out of business tomorrow.
Yeah.
That is a huge priority. If you realize that you don't have enough of a runway to last into next year, that's maybe a problem you need to resolve within the next 6 months. It's not going to kill you in the next 12 hours, but it's still something you need to be thinking about. If you have grandiose plans to 10x your user base in the next few years, that certainly warrants attention, but it's going to be at the bottom of the pyramid. And what we found was that a lot of founders who don't survive the journey, it's not because they're not solving problems, it's just because they're solving the wrong problems. They may be focusing on something that doesn't need attention for a couple of years. All the while, there's something at the top of the pyramid that they need to be focusing on today. And it's something that everyone we interviewed managed to triage effectively.
I think to that point, actually, it's so important because one of the founders we interviewed, Nick Whitehouse, he did a legal AI startup, came from New Zealand, got acquired in the US, which is fantastic. And he said, in our part of the world, when you talk about the problems you choose to tackle, you can't fix all of them. You can't even fix some of them. You're basically at a casino making bets. And we're in a finance podcast right now.
That's stressful,
that's
right?
Stressful.
Yeah.
And him embracing that, saying, we're taking very judicious bets on where to put the resources.
The calculated risk.
That's right, the calculated risk. And I thought that was a really interesting way to put it. He said, here, that's the most important thing, followed by the team. The teams that you can get here are going to have so much more buy-in because they have to. They can't just faff around going from startup to startup.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I worked at a startup previously as well, and I found it so interesting because there weren't as many in Australia, right? Like you can name them on your hand, right? Whereas you go to Silicon Valley and every block is chock block full of 100 different startups. So it is quite different here as well in the way that they kind of relate. The big thing that I noticed as well was just that the culture here just didn't understand startups in a certain way. And that was a challenge that I found, especially with raising money. Now, this might not be as applicable to people who are listening, but a lot of these startups, we want to be proud of the companies that come out of Australia. But the challenge for a lot of these founders are to get money in Australia to fund these businesses. So I know from my experience that I've worked with CEOs who had to get funding from abroad. Is that something that you see here as well?
Consistently. So we spoke with Wenee, who isn't your traditional founder. She was actually Australia's biggest YouTuber. She has 22 million followers across YouTube, TikTok, etc. And in 2020, like a lot of us, she was in lockdown, twiddling her thumbs, got really into crypto gaming and raised funds for something called Nyan Heroes, so cats in mech suits, which is great and awesome and lots of fun. But all the funding came from overseas, from Singapore, from Las Vegas, from LA. And that's because none of that would have possibly been understood by the Australian market, which is looking for blue chip, safe bets, very normal. Whereas she understood, if you're going to take a bet like this, you're going to need to go to the investors who understand the nature of a risk like this.
At the same time, if you're a startup in Australia or any kind of business and you've managed to find local funding, it's probably because you're very good at what you do. It's like you hear those really macho stories about Spartan children who were sent out into the wilderness and many of them would die, but those that returned, they were real warriors. And it's kind of the same with Australian startups where in order to raise funds here, you need to be able to prove your business model. You can't just have a great idea. You need to have a business case and show that you've generated revenue and show how you're going to be able to generate much more. And so for a local venture capital fund to say, yeah, okay, we'll give you money, it's almost like you've been through a trial by fire. And so you're going to have a much more maintainable business with all things being equal. So for an optimist, it might actually be a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. But I find it so discouraging, though, that that money isn't raised here. Do you find that that appetite is changing? Like, do you think that more people are like, yeah, I do want to invest in Australian businesses? Or is it just like we just still don't get it?
I think that it's such an interesting question for you to ask, Anna, because I think that there are certain institutions like certain VCs associated with, for example, UNSW founders, a VC called Kylie Fraser has come in and said, we are supporting early stage startups. That's all I'm about. So some people have recognized the promise, the potential of doing this. But as a whole, I'm not sure that we have hit that level of maturity yet. Certainly it has changed a lot in the last 10 years. But I think it is still a challenge that I think Australian startups need to overcome. As Thomas said when he said basically that Australian startups are basically Spartans.
Yeah.
I think he's also speaking to that point, this research that came out very recently, and we cover it in our book as well, that Australia is the best place in the world to find a unicorn. It's the most capital efficient. That is, for every dollar you invest, you have a much higher likelihood of finding $1 billion company. And when you think about it, that's hardly an accident. We give our businesses so little money and push them to make sure that they're actually getting money from customer revenue so much earlier. And that is basically the mantra of most startups communities in Australia. Monetize, monetize, monetize. That it becomes a very different business that comes out the other end, which can go overseas and immediately become more profitable. But for those businesses or ideas that really do need to go through R&D, I think that that's going through its own challenges right now.
That makes so much sense, because here it's like if you're not getting the support, you're not getting the funding, you have to make sure that your business works from day one.
That's right.
Whereas anyone who's spent time in Silicon Valley knows that you can plunk a lot of money into a business and it doesn't have to have any revenue. It doesn't have to have any profit for a very long time.
Yep. We saw it with Uber, right? It's only recently turned around. Yeah.
But I think that's a really interesting point that you raise, Anna, for your listeners specifically. Because I think for people who want to get rich slow, the idea of launching a startup, the kind of business where you raise external money and any profit that you generate, you reinvest back into the business, it might seem almost at odds with the idea of investing sensibly. Something that we explore and we really believe in is that small business does not need to be a concession. I think so often in the media and in this tech bro culture, there's this idea that every startup is going to be like Meta or Atlassian, and a small business is a mum and dad laundromat. But some of the biggest companies in the world started as small businesses. One of the key differences is that if you launch a startup, you are investing your money into scaling the business so that it can grow exponentially. Whereas if you launch a small business, the moment that it starts turning a profit and the moment that you've paid off your expenses, you can pocket that money.
Yeah.
So for some people, depending on what your goals are, that might actually make much more sense. The way we describe it in the book is we compare startups to weeds and small businesses to trees. Weeds spread quickly. You plant them and they just spread and spread and spread. Whereas trees, sometimes they might not plant their roots, Their roots might not take to the soil. But if they do, they might slowly but surely grow. They don't grow as quickly as weeds, but once they've cast their branches, they might actually provide a much better ecosystem for all the creatures that live within it. So, there's no need to turn up one's nose at small businesses. It can sometimes be a really successful business model.
Yeah, I love that analogy. And sometimes you see these businesses going from like small things to doing something miraculous. And I know like it was exciting when I was at the previous startup that I was at. It was so fascinating watching the company grow and then hit IPO and then being listed as one of the companies on Australia's top 200 list, being on VAS. Like that was something that was really remarkable and feeling very proud of that.
Yeah, that must have been totally trippy having been part of that journey, especially given the space in which you work now. It must have been like seeing two friends of yours who you didn't know would ever know each other, finding that they've struck up a friendship and you look across the room and they're laughing together and you think, hey, how do you two know each other?
Yeah, it's great. And we want to see that in Australia. We want to see these businesses grow. There's a lot of people who are starting out right now as well with a side hustle or a potential business or, wanting to do a startup. Do you have any advice? I know that like when you're looking at big companies like Canva and Atlassian, you're like, oh, I'll never get there. But that's not, there's takeaways from these big companies that can be applicable to, someone doing a side hustle.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Right at the start, I think one of the most useful things that we found all the founders did is to network before they actually needed anything.
That's great. That's should be a life suggestion. That's like an advice for life.
Yeah, because if you need something, if you have a specific ask, whatever it is, whether you're looking to ask an investor for money or whether you're looking to ask a potential distributor to sell a product you might be delivering, it can be very easy for your intention to cloud the relationship, even subconsciously. Whereas if you just network with people when you don't need anything from them, all that you're focusing on is developing a connection with the person.
That's right. Just go with kindness, go with openness, see how you can go in and be helpful before you could possibly ask for anything. And we found this so often throughout our careers, certainly with this book, that when you actually go out in the world that way, it's a positivity that comes back to you. So network before you have anything to ask for.
All you need to do is know what kind of industry you might want to enter.
That's right.
So you think, okay, for example, I might know that I want to launch a hospitality business, or I want to launch an app that helps dog owners identify when their dogs have depression. Huge market in that, I'm sure. But whatever it might be, just think, okay, cool. I'm going to get to know people in the pet industry or in the hospitality industry. I don't know what I might need from them as of yet, but that's okay. I'm just expanding my horizons. Not only will you have those relationships when you might need them, but you'll also probably learn from that process.
That's right. And I think that we actually saw that, right, with Jenna Leo, the CEO and founder of Like Family, which is this social business that almost you'd expect it to be government run. Before they really knew what they were going to do in this space, they attended disability conferences, they attended sort of aged care events and said, we would like to help. And that was it. There wasn't this intention, we're going to build a platform, we're going to connect you to carers. No, because that's putting the cart before the horse. And I think I see that a lot. I've been a startup coach with the UNSW founders for a number of years now. You can't invent the product if you haven't spoken to the customer.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to go out with that kind of openness, that comfort. Yeah.
The other thing that I would add, if someone's listening and they think, I'd like to make some money from something entrepreneurial, but I don't know what the right approach is. Should I launch a side hustle around my job? Should I commit and launch a small business? Should I try and get into the tech space and launch a startup? I would really just suggest asking yourself, how do you want to spend your days? For example, we'll refer to pet sitting because I worked for the pet sitting startup Mad Paws. If you know that you love pets and you want to spend additional time with pets, launching a startup is probably not the right idea. Instead, just consider becoming a pet sitter. It's something you can do as a side hustle. You can fit it in around your career, and you will spend almost all of your additional time in the presence of animals. So if that's your goal, great, mission accomplished. If you want to build a livelihood around being with pets, then you might want to consider a small business. For example, a dog grooming business. Now, if you do this, you're going to need to invest some time in non-pet related activities, doing the books, marketing, HR, but still spending time in the presence of animals is going to be a cornerstone of your day. It just means that you'll need to attend to a lot of other tasks around it. But let's say what really matters to you is solving a problem that pet owners might have. That's when a startup is going to be great. Because if you launch a startup and you love pets, you're probably not going to spend any of your professional time with pets. You're going to be in meetings all the day. You're going to be chasing down funding. You're going to be solving problems. But what you can do is you can identify a problem that people like you face, and you can invest all of your time into solving that problem. So if you can ask yourself those questions, like, what is it I actually want to do with my days? Then you'll probably bring yourself closer to an answer.
I love that answer because it's true, right? Like you want your idea of business or side hustle or startup might be completely different based on what you're looking for in your life. And I think there were some really important things that both of you said that is a really good way about thinking of it, especially how you want to spend your time and your days. But if you do go further down that road where you want to do kind of the startup side, talking to your customers is so important. So sometimes that grunt work is really grunt work. I don't want to say grunt work, but like, walking the dog. Like, what are customers experiencing if I'm going to be working in a space, and what problem am I solving? In product management, so anyone who works in tech, that's exactly what you're doing. You are talking to customers, you're understanding what their problem is, and you're trying to solve that problem. And that is essentially what a lot of startups have done. Like, how do we connect people? How do we make it easier to design? How do we make it easier to find someone to look after your pets? Whatever that might be, you're talking to the customer, you're figuring out what that problem is. I'm sure you've talked to a lot of founders who are thinking about the customer and the problem simultaneously. Is this something that if you're starting out with a side hustle or a business idea, do you think it's still relevant at every single level?
Always.
It's the most important thing, I would dare say.
Yeah, I think as a rule of thumb, and I thought it was really great, Bond University Accelerator said, you need to talk to at least 60 customers before you offer your first service. Because are you offering the right service? You've made assumptions, and it's the only way to stop the assumptions from happening and aligning it with what's actually in the marketplace.
Yeah, because something we found is the most important thing you can do when it comes to customer research is actually letting your customers tell you what it is that they need instead of leading the witness, so to speak.
And we found that really with Farage, which was a startup that came out of Sydney. Basically, they thought they needed to build a mentoring platform. They interviewed 600 students, and all the students said, yeah, to get a job, I need mentoring. To get my graduate job, I can't get there. So they listened to them, literally. They built the mentoring platform and crickets.
Yeah.
No one. And then they went, oh my God, what are we going to do? The two co-founders looked at each other, Tom Brunskill and Pasha Rayan, and they said, what did they actually say? They said they needed a job. So, crazy idea. What if we created internships, but not in the very gated way that you often see, the top law firms, top banks, there's only 10% that can get through. What if we created virtual internships that anyone could technically be a part of, partner with the organizations? They're getting a much more diverse group of people coming through, not, someone's private school friends or whatever. Let's try that. That was a hit.
Yeah.
But they had to speak to 600 students before they reached that point, because prior to that, without meaning to, they had inadvertently been leading the witness. They would say, hey, you said you wanted jobs. How would you feel about a mentorship? And these students would say, mentorship, that sounds great. But the students didn't know what they didn't know. They just heard mentorship and they thought, if I have a mentor, that mentor might offer me a job. So initially, the founders at Farage had thought, great, we found our product. And then when it didn't gel, they thought, why is that? And so they just kept asking questions until they got to the root of what it was that their customer base was actually looking for.
Yeah, I love this. I think this is why research is so important if you're doing any type of side hustle or course. Like when I was trying to put my course out as well, some of the questions that I was asking was parents, like, what kind of issues are you having? Is it cash flow? Is it how do I invest for my kid? Is it how do I teach my kids about money? And if you're asking leading questions, if you're like, oh, do you want to build wealth for your child? Sure, I can come to a million conclusions with that and decide what they want. But if you don't fully understand what what problem they're having at the moment, you can build the wrong product.
Like, who doesn't want to build wealth for their children,
Yeah, of
right?
course. I know exactly what I'm going to do.
I don't want that.
Yeah. But it can be really open to interpretation. And I know there's been times where I've worked on products where because people are like, oh, they want this and we're going to build this. And it's like, no. What problem are we solving? What are they really saying? And that's kind of the important part if you're doing a business or a side hustle of any sorts. What are some other things that you think is really important for anyone who's starting a business or a side hustle to consider? Like, what are some of the mistakes that you've seen people? I mean, you've just talked about one right now, a big mistake. Are there any other big mistakes that you see happen?
You know what? And he did just talk about one. I think not understanding the unit economics of what you're offering. Finance, not knowing the numbers, that is the number one issue, I think. You see it happen every time. And I think when we spoke to Tim Fung, he had just made Airtasker profitable. And I thought that was really interesting. He said, I was going to do it over 2 years. I did it over 8 months because I did not want to go to another fundraise.
Right.
And he said that the truth is mastering unit economics of how much is marketing costing? How much is each sale costing? How much does it cost to actually provide? Of course, this will come over time, but not even having an idea, that's where so many businesses fall down. You have to find the passion that you connect with, and it's rarely the money side. But at the same time, understanding that that's what underpins this as a business is essential.
I think something else that's probably, it's going to sound quite trite and almost cliched, but just get started. This is something we heard from everyone we interviewed. And I think for someone who has an idea, they want to work towards a goal, they might have a full-time job, perhaps they have dependents, the idea of getting started can feel very daunting because there are all these connotations that come with that. Like, if I get started on this idea, will I need to quit my job? Will I need to take time away from my family? How am I going to manage that? But getting started does not need to mean removing your financial security blanket. It can be just launching a very simple website to test your concept. It can mean putting together a database of the kind of people you think are going to want your product and then testing the most basic idea. I've worked in startups for many years and I find that my mind glazes over when I hear terms like MVP, minimum viable product, etc. But really, what it is just get a really, really simple version of what you want and get people to start using it.
Yeah.
And if it sucks, then that's great because you're learning things.
Yeah, you didn't spend all the time and money building something that no one wants. You know right off the bat.
Just think of it like the lowest stakes version of what you could possibly do. It's like, if you want to, well, we wrote a book, right? And we understand that when you first sit down to write it, and maybe you had this experience with your 2 books as well, at the beginning you can think, oh my gosh, I want this to be perfect. And I don't want to start writing if it's not going to be great. So I guess I just need to wait until it feels like it's going to be perfect. And then you don't start. And then eventually you need to have a conversation with yourself where you say, no, write a bad chapter. Write the worst possible chapter you can because then you will have started. And then by the time you start writing, you think, hopefully, oh, well, this isn't actually as bad as I thought it would be. And then you settle into a rhythm. And then by the end, you've maybe written a first draft. And then if there were some sections that were terrible, you go and rewrite them. And I think it's the same with business as well. Just start with the most basic product you can, the most basic low stakes iteration of what you have in mind, and know that if people hate it, you're still going to learn from that and it's still going to move you forward.
I think that that's an awesome takeaway because it also relates to investing or building wealth.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it's just that money mindset. In this sense, it's the business mindset. Like, oh, it might be too hard or this, or what if it takes away from my job or my family? What if you're successful? What if you get to actually build the life that you love through the business that you feel passionate about?
Exactly.
And similarly, it relates back to investing and building wealth. It's like, I don't know if I'm going to pick the right ETF or the right platform, or what if it's the wrong thing? Guess what? You can always change your mind.
Absolutely.
Similarly, like with investing, you can choose a different ETF. You can alter your business. You did the MVP and people didn't really like it. Guess what? You can do it again.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it will be better this time.
For sure.
Because you can learn why people didn't like the first version.
Exactly right.
Exactly. Thank you so much for this amazing chat. Where can people find your book and when is it available?
It's available the 29th of October, 2025. It'll be available in all good bookstores. It's already on Amazon. Pre-orders can be taken now.
Amazing.
And we are currently in the process of trying to negotiate to get it as an audiobook as well for all of you podcast listeners out there who would rather listen to a book than read it.
Of course.
You are our
I'm a
people.
fan of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you found this episode helpful, please rate us 5 stars, write a review, or share with a friend. If you're new to investing, make sure to listen to our first 10 episodes. Follow us at Get Rich Slow Club or Tash at Tash Invests or me at Ana Cristina.
The Get Rich Slow Club podcast is a collaboration between Tash Etchman from Tash Invest and Ana Cristina from Perla. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to investing. So make sure you check out our financial services guides and read the product disclosure statement and target market determination for any investments you're considering. See our show notes for more info. Any advice is general and does not consider your financial situation, needs, or objectives, so consider whether it's appropriate for you. This show was brought to you by Natasha Etchman, who is an authorized representative 1299881 of Guideway Financial Services, AFSL 420367, and Perla, who is an authorized representative 1281540 of Sanlam Private Wealth, AFSL 337927. The Get Rich Slow Club acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land we record on. From coast to coast, across land, waters, and communities, we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging.